February 3rd.
I did, and I'll respond to you in a little while. I've been super busy.
It's not critical. It's just it dawned on me that I shouldn't be giving a presentation representing the museum without, oh, I didn't realize I had that background on there. I shouldn't
It's
be giving a presentation without letting you know about it. And I'm
Thank
going to
you.
do 6 paintings.
All
But
right.
I'm looking for some interior shots. Of course, they'll be old and won't work anymore after the remodeling, but at least I can sort of show what it looked like before.
Yeah, and maybe we can talk offline about that with Allison, who has a lot of these shots.
Oh,
Yeah, I
good.
think we're live on Facebook now, so we're going to go ahead and get started, and then we're looking
Okay.
forward to your tour in a couple weeks, though. That'll be great. Well, welcome everyone, and welcome everyone on Facebook too. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to our weekly tour where we kind of let you through the museum virtually. We're happy to have you here, and a couple of guidelines before we begin. So if you could just keep yourself muted for the duration of the talk, we would really appreciate it. That way there's no talking over each other and everyone can hear our wonderful docent speak. If you have any questions during the talk, you can go ahead and put them in the chat box. So that's that speech bubble at the bottom of your screen on Zoom. You can click that and type your question there. If you're watching from Facebook, you can also put your questions in the chat on Facebook in the comment section, and we'll be monitoring that. So we'll get to those as well. We'll get to all the questions at the end. So if you, during the talk, like I said, if you could mute yourself, but if our docent asks questions to the audience, you're welcome to unmute yourself and answer her questions, since we do like some participation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our docent today, Susan Tiefenbrunn. This is her first virtual tour, right? So we're very excited to have her, and she'll be leading us through a tour of the Timken collection. So take it away, Susan.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Susan Tiefenbrunn, and I have a very weird background. I was for 25 years a French professor at Columbia University. I have a PhD in French. I have a very large art history collection because while I was studying French language and literature and culture, I also was interested in art. And then in the midlife crisis age, I became a lawyer and then a law professor. And now I am a docent at the Timken Museum. So I'm really excited to do this tour and this virtual tour with you. And I'm going to talk first about the tapestries that you see in front of you. They are gorgeous. They are done by designs by Antoine Caron, and border designs were done by Henri Laurent. And remember, the great tapestries in France are Gobelins and Aubusson, but I have to tell you, these are as good, if not better, than what I've seen in France. So these are 4 tapestries from the series called The Stories of Queen Artemisia. And these tapestries were done in the 16th century, 1562 to 1565, and they were done in Paris to decorate the palace of the Duke Charles Emmanuel I of Savoy. And that palace was in Turin, Italy. And the 4 tapestries illustrate the episodes from the stories of this Queen Artemisia. It's an epic tale created by Nicolas Huel, and it's about the lives of 2 ancient queens, both of whom were named Artemisia. They were combined into a single queen of the same name. 3 of the panels show this monarch rewarding her soldiers with the spoils of war, and the 4th one is the queen distributing the booty. That's the one I'm going to talk about a little bit more. That tapestry was woven sometime between 1611 and 1620 in France, and the cartoons for the tapestry were drawn by various French artists around 1600 to 1617 in the early 17th century. They're absolutely beautiful. They're made with dyed and undyed wool, silk, real silk threads, real silver, gold, metallic threads. And you just have to sit and luxuriate in the exuberance and magnificence of these drawings and these great tapestries. So now let's move into the Russian gallery. That's the Queen distributing the booty, by the way. Now let's move into the Russian gallery, where you see all together in one image the deesis containing the Savior enthroned in the middle, the Virgin Mary and the Archangel Michael and the Archangel Gabriel, and that we'll talk about in more detail. I'm going to talk a little bit about what are icons. By the way, my parents were from Russia, and I speak, read, and write Russian, but if you're looking at a Russian icon, it's the words typically are written in Old Church Slavonic, which is a language nobody in Russia can really understand today unless you're a specialist in that language. And here we even have some Greek letters on the icon. Now, what is an icon? It's from the Greek word image or resemblance. The iconostasis is a Russian word for a sanctuary screen with icons that are displayed on it. And the icons are used in religious devotion, mostly in the cultures of the Eastern Russian Orthodox Church. They are painted on wood of holy figures such as Christ, the Virgin Mary, saints, and angels. And these religious images are displayed on a wall of icons called the iconostasis, which you see at the top of the image in front of you. That iconostasis separates the sanctuary and the nave in a church. And they symbolize the boundary between, the iconostasis symbolizes a boundary between the divine and the human worlds. I must say that the Timken Museum has one of the largest and most important collections of Russian icons in the world, thanks to the Putnam sisters, who collected them during the 1930s and the 1980, after, you know, communism set in Russia, and Russia needed a lot of money, and they were willing to sell icons to rich philanthropists. The icon is a sign of the presence of God. They are believed to be divinely revealed, and the figures are not at all realistic. They are two-dimensional, flat figures, not naturalistic or realistic. And you can see that the religious figures have elongated features, such as long, thin fingers pointing upward toward heaven. And the heads of the six figures in this deesis icon are all tilted, if you notice, as if in reverence to God. And their eyes are very large and soulful. This is called the flat Byzantine style, with little or no conventional perspective. And these icons made it easy for illiterate as well as literate people to understand the stories of the religious stories. They date back to the 15th century. They're done in what we call the Novgorod school in Russia. And the royal gates are works of art of the 15th century that form a dominant exposition of the Timken icon gallery and collection. The deesis, again, is the prayer row, consisting here of 6 separate icons, with the 7th icon in the middle, which we'll talk about in more detail in a moment, and that's called the Savior enthroned. The 7 icons are all made of tempera on wood. The golden background of the 6 icons surrounding the Savior enthroned symbolizes the spiritual world that is divinely inspired and is radiant. The golden halos also symbolize the grandeur and the magnificence of heaven, where there is no evil, where there is no darkness. The deesis, or this prayer row, is the first row in the iconostasis. It's located in the Timken Museum above another icon called the Royal Gates, which you see right there on the second image. Now let's look a little bit at the deesis of the Savior enthroned. This, of course, is the Christ depicted as an emperor. He's to the right, lower right-hand corner of this image in front of you. He's seated on a throne in his heavenly court. Jesus is wearing a red robe covered over in a blue cloak. The red symbolizes humanity. The blue represents divinity. Jesus holds a closed gospel in his left hand, and he raises his right hand to make a blessing. Christ appears as the creator. He is the Lord of heaven. He is the judge. And 6 very small church fathers, who may be Russian saints, are depicted standing 3 on each side of the upper quarter of the painting. And looking at this painting of the Savior, you can see that on Jesus's right and left are the Virgin Mary and Saint John the Baptist, looking at the top figure above you on the dais. Mary wears a blue outer garment, symbolizing her heavenly nature. In the middle are archangels. You can see them with wings and spheres and staffs in hand, and wearing red robes, or which we call hymations, thrown over the shoulders. Later on, you can see the archangel Michael, who is depicted in very bright red colors, elegance of his contours, and on the other side is Gabriel, the archangel Gabriel, painted in soft and muffled tones. And the Saint Peter, to the right of the Savior, is shown as an old man with gray hair and a beard. The apostles Peter and Paul are on the far ends. And I could go on for a very long time, but I'm just going to move on to the royal gates to explain their specificity. It's a very magnificent 15th century depiction of the royal gates. And what are the royal gates? They are the gates of the Tsar, the door of the Tsar to heaven and to the church. They're set in the center of the iconostasis. They are called the royal gates because Christ, who is the King of glory as represented by his priest, must enter the royal gates that lead to the altar, and only the clergy may pass through the royal gates. The royal gates are also known as the deacons' doors because the deacons of the church use them during services. The royal gates were made again in Russia, in Novgorod, in the 15th century. And there are icons that date back to the early Christian period. This royal gates is made of wood carved with 3 registers on each half. And the Archangel Gabriel is announcing to the Virgin Mary that she is to become the mother of Jesus, the Son of God. And the other 4 panels represent the evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And I might say that in the home of the Putnam sisters, the Russian icons hung on the walls because Sister Amy was a student of Russian like I was, and she had a special interest in the icons. And over the fireplace, a large icon of the Jerusalem Mother of God, an absolutely magnificent work, which we have now, and I'm going to talk about now, is in the Timken. It was one of Amy's favorite icons. So let's now look at the Jerusalem Mother of God. Incredibly beautiful. You can see her head is leaning toward the baby Jesus, and she is depicted in what we call the pose of the Hodegetria. This is the Greek word for the pointer of the way. And you can look at her hand. She is pointing with those long, thin, elongated fingers to the Christ child. She is the way, the truth. He is the way, the truth, and the light, and she is pointing to him. So she is the Hodegetria. Mary, the Mother of God, holds the Christ child on her left leg as they both look tenderly at each other. Her right hand gestures toward Jesus, and this is interpreted as she who shows the way. And this icon first appeared in the Sofia Cathedral in Novgorod as a gift from Prince Vladimir Sviatoslavich. He was loved by everyone, but soon came Ivan the Terrible, who transferred the icon to the Dormition Cathedral at the Moscow Kremlin and placed it on one of the pillars there. Notice that Christ holds a white scroll on his teachings, and the scroll is the Old Testament law, and Jesus is the fulfillment of it. And I think I'm not going to talk too much more about this because we have a limited time, but the Christ child wears a white tunic under a striated orange and gold royal chiton, and the symbol above his head reads ICXC, which is Jesus Christ, and his halo contains a cross and the Greek abbreviation for the words I am. This Jerusalem Mother of God is a favorite icon of the Christians from Russia, Georgia, and is often referred to, therefore, as the Georgian Mother of God in 18th and 19th century Russia. So I hope you'll come and look at this. It's really quite an extraordinary piece, and the Temkin icons are masterpieces. Let's move on now to the Italian gallery. We'll speak now quickly, although it's difficult to speak quickly, of this really beautiful portrait of a lady in a green dress. It was done by Bartolomeo Veneto in 1530, a very important period in Italian art history. It is clearly in a Renaissance, a work by a Renaissance master. It's the last signed work of Bartolomeo. It's probably the final portrait by Bartolomeo, as well as one of his best preserved works. By the way, this is a portrait, and we'll be looking at different genres. I tried to give you a picture of different genres: landscapes, portraits, genre scenes, and this is one of the portraits. Portraits were very popular in Italy and in Northern Europe in the period of the Renaissance. There was some question as to the identity of the sitter in this portrait. I'll tell you at the end that this one scholar suggests that the sitter is Maria Paleologo, who is the heiress of Monferrato, for whatever that means. What do we see in this portrait? What does the painting of the woman tell us about her? She has a commanding gaze. She's wearing very beautiful and opulent clothing. Her elaborate exotic headdress is richly decorated, and it sits on top of her neatly coiffed brown hair with a crown of curls and a straight part in the middle. She is very elegant. She is well dressed and perfect. This hairpiece has blue and gold ribbons on it with a white bow, a bejeweled pin in the center. Her hairstyle is very simple. Her hair is drawn back smoothly over her temples, but her very lush green silk dress, this enormous hair covering, and her long blue lapis lazuli rosary beads that serve as a necklace for her, and her two golden rings, by the way, are all very lavish, very extraordinary, very seductive. These details reveal the lady's high social status. Her elaborate dress is magnificent, especially the big puffy sleeves, which have long cuts below the elbows to reveal what? A rich white lining, which is embroidered beautifully. Notice in black and white, and the whiteness of the undercover points to her white hands, her white neck, her white face, very beloved by the white skin is very revered by the nobility. The bavaro is made of silk damask embroidered with a royal pomegranate. A pomegranate is a sign of nobility. On her waist, she wears a violet colored sash. Violet or purple is another color of nobility. It has a large ribbon too. On her right hand, she wears a falconer glove, and she holds the other glove, which is much smaller than the one on her right hand, believe it or not. Her rich and costly clothing reveals that she's a lady of high birth, possibly ready to go out to, or maybe she's just coming from a hunt. A powerful light directed from the left of the painting illuminates the very natural features of this fine lady, which is sculpted with deep shadows. She's depicted from a slightly elevated vantage point and painted against a dark red velvet curtain. Red, velvet, purple, all signs of nobility. The lady of obviously noble birth is presented as a real person. She's not an allegorical beauty painted flatly, as we saw with the Georgian Mother of God. Her head is turned to 3/4, as if her attention is drawn to an onlooker. She has a very angled gaze in her eyes, as well as her quizzical expression. She's not too happy right this minute. She's suspicious about something. And all these details draw our attention to her very physical and psychological presence on the canvas. She has an air of regal authority and magnificence, probably due to her 3/4 length appearance on the cameo. Think about her when we look at the Jacques Louis David painting later, where you'll see a very small figure seated on a chair. Okay, now the second picture that I'm going to talk about in the Italian gallery is Il Guercino's The Return of the Prodigal Son. Also a magnificent painting, painted in the 17th century in 1654 to 1655. By the way, just as a matter of information for you, Il Guercino, which means squint-eyed, he was the head of the Bolognese School of Painting after Guido Reni died, who was his competitor. And this prodigal son was done right smack in the midst of the 17th century. It's based on the parable taken from the New Testament, which teaches the virtues of forgiveness and repentance. You all know the story. There were two sons. The elder son was the good son. The younger son was very extravagant, lost all the money that his wealthy father gave him, and the younger son returns home quite repentant, and he is called the prodigal son. Guercino painted this Return of the Prodigal Son many times, 6 times, using half-length figures. The father is dressed in what looks like purple silk robes, obviously wealthy, with a red lining that is draped over one shoulder, and he tries to drape this red lining over his almost naked and bare-chested son to protect him. The father wears a blue turban, has a long beard signifying his advanced age. He holds his son's outstretched hand to comfort him. The son is crying. He's very repentant. He holds a simple white cloth to his eyes. He's crying. The head is bent to one side in shame. His scanty clothes reveal his impoverishment, in contrast to the elegant clothes of the father and the not so unelegant clothes of the servant, who is closing the curtains in order to hide perhaps the son's shame. The boy's pants are torn and short. He covers his waist with a short white cloth. The painting shows a little bit of blue sky in the right-hand corner, which is quite interesting, but below that are the white clouds, the sadness covering the sky. The servant's clothes are more elaborate than the prodigal son's and less elaborate than the father, but because he wears a white shirt with a black trim and blue trousers with slits. The father is, above all, merciful and understanding of the son, who is grieving over the lost fortune and his wicked lifestyle. This imagery in this painting, with the very interesting anatomy of the prodigal son, painted almost as beautifully and as carefully as a Michelangelo sculpture. The shadows on his left arm, this chest has shadows under his left arm. This long brown curly hair reminds us that he's still a youth, and his tears confirm that he is soulful and sorry for his bad deeds. And this is quite the classical style of painting, something really wonderful to look at. And so we'll move on to the French gallery, if you don't mind. I'm going to start with a painting of the pastoral landscape. Again, this is a different genre from what you saw before with the portraits of the 3 big figures. This is a pastoral landscape. The figures, there are 5 figures in this Claude Lorrain pastoral landscape with some cows and 2 dogs and a shepherd wearing an antique clothing with a girl wearing a blue dress, carrying a basket on her head. And there are 2 dogs in the picture below, while the shepherd tends to his flock of beasts. And to the left of the painting, you see another shepherd or peasant with very muscular legs, with a woman crouched down, perhaps tending to his feet, washing them or fixing his toenails, and a shepherdess wearing brown antique clothing behind the seated male shepherd. This is called the high Baroque classical style. I must tell you that in 17th century French literature, just briefly, there are 2 periods, Baroque and classical. And they're separate and very different one from each other. But here we have something called, miraculously, the high Baroque classical style, which I have always been quite amazed at. This is called the ideal landscape painting. It is a pastoral landscape by Claude Lorrain, the 17th century painter who was also a printmaker and an art theorist, who was admired for his Baroque classical landscape. And the thing about Claude Lorrain is the contrast between light and shade. The light coming from the sky, but the shade with the clouds, dark green on the right-hand side, and foliage, and some lighter colored browns on the ground where the very tiny figures are seated. So the characteristics of the Baroque style normally are grandeur, sensuous richness, drama, vitality, movement. The style of Baroque is full of tension and emotional exuberance, many of which are seen in this painting, with the young man seated and looking at the girl longingly with his eyes on the left side of the painting. Some of the characteristics of classical art generally refer to a high regard for a classical period, for classical antiquity. Look to the left, beyond there's a fort, a classical antique fort. And that's the classical part of this painting. And it's normally the opposite of Baroque because it's considered balanced by harmony and, above all, moderation, stillness, very little movement. So here we have dark colors, a little bit of white on the cow and on the colors of the 2 women and the brightness of the blue dress, but mostly dark skies. And Claude Lorrain is a major figure in French art. He was poor. He grew up in a village called Chamagne. He was supposed to be a pastry cook. His parents died when he was 12, and he went to Italy to study, and he went to Rome in 1626 and settled there permanently, as a matter of fact. And Claude painted this painting in Rome, and as it looks like the Roman Campagna, and he had a feeling for the countryside. In fact, how did he work? And how did he put all his great works in a volume called the Liber Veritatis, which is in the British Museum of London? How did he work? Every morning at 5 a.m, he would lie in the fields before the break of day and until night in order to learn to represent very accurately and very exactly the red morning sky at sunrise and the sunset and the evening hours. He was a very serious guy, didn't marry. He lived for his work. He was on good terms with a great French landscapist, Nicolas Poussin, and he was also a French master of the ideal landscape. But there was little contact between Claude Lorrain and Poussin. They were basically, he was a loner, concentrating on mastering his great works of the ideal landscape. Now, I'd like to look at another French artist, Francois Boucher. What a difference. We have a one of the largest paintings in the Timken Museum is this painting of the lovers in a park. And it was done by Boucher, who died in 1770. This one was done in 1758, about 20 or 30 years before the French Revolution in the 18th century under Louis XIV. And it was the most favorite painting of Louis XV's mistress, Madame de Pompadour. It is a masterpiece of Rococo style, complete opposite of the neoclassicist or the classicist like Jacques-Louis David. Why? Because it was abundant, lots of figures, big figures, huge emphasis on items, the Amorini, the King Cavalier Spaniel symbolizing fidelity at the bottom, the pastel colors of the clothing, and the story that you're being told in this incredibly busy Rococo painting. Jacques-Louis David, who painted later on, who's again a monument of French art, he rejected this style of Rococo. He said it was too whimsical, too frivolous, not serious enough for us. We must do something in the neoclassical style, more rigid, more perfecting in the anatomy, etc. But Boucher's striking brushwork and his amazing sense of color, in contrast to what we saw earlier, that dark painting by Claude Lorrain's landscape in the high Baroque classical style. This is like Lorrain's painting. This is a pastoral scene. It's a pastoral landscape. But here, his landscape is lush, much larger, graceful figures, the two seated lovers, and the maiden passing by, and the King Charles Spaniel, and the two Amorini sculptures, which is a symbol of earthly love. The garden is a symbol of romantic love. It's a story being told. There's a green dried up wreath hanging from one of the branches of the tree, and there's a blue wreath hanging from on the woman's arm, the female lover is wearing on her arm. But the flowers in the lover's hair, interestingly enough, are forget-me-nots, because this lover is about to forget her true as he looks on to the young maiden who is passing by with some flowers in two baskets on a pole. The Rococo version of this painterly tradition of the lovers in a garden it goes back to the medieval period. These are very sensual, the folds in the dresses, the voluminous costumes they're wearing. They're all barefoot. Again, another erotic image. The lovers are gazing. The husband or the lover is looking at the maiden and not at his lover, and a rather typical French scene with a love about to emerge between the lover seated and the maiden carrying the flowers. The second woman, the maiden, is dressed in less elaborate but nevertheless very beautiful clothing, and she appears to be a milkmaid or a shepherdess who has been gathering her own flowers. This scene of peasants in the garden, these are not peasants. These are too well dressed to be peasants. So it's the people in the court, the courtiers, anxious to get away from the noise and rumors and onlooking people from the court to a more private setting in the garden. They are the glances of the lover and the corresponding tilt of the head and the glance of the milkmaid tell the whole story. The women are wearing décolleté dresses, revealing ever so slightly their breasts, and these supposed peasants are clearly very noble, and they have the white skin of the nobility, and everyone's head is tilted as if to tell a story. This lush depiction of nature lends a glimpse of eroticism to this masterful painting. Go and see it, you'll enjoy it. Now let's look at something else. Jacques-Louis David. I cannot tell you how important Jacques-Louis David is to art history and history of France and politics. Looking at the portrait that he painted of Cooper Penrose in 1802, we have a very early 19th century painting just after the French Revolution in 1789. Now, Jacques-Louis David is the preeminent neoclassical painter of the late 18th and early 19th century. And this portrait is clearly neoclassical with the black and white colors. The man is very small. He's seated on a chair. He's wearing a black waistcoat, a white shirt inside that sticks out a little bit above his jacket, black or gray, dark gray breeches and white stockings. You can't see his feet. His background, the background of this painting is very dark, and he looks kind of with a slight smile. David was able to paint with great detail fabrics and the anatomy. Look at his hands. Yes, one hand is facing down, the other hand is facing to the side. But even the hands have a detail and realism in the anatomy that is quite extraordinary. And his face has lots of wrinkles, and I love the little feature of his curled white hair and almost bald top. He has aging skin and very liquid eyes. This is a picture that was designed to be showing self-conscious austerity, because the fact of the matter is that Cooper Penrose was a prominent member of the Quaker family from England who migrated to Waterford, Ireland in the 17th century. Waterford Crystal, that's him. And he was a merchant, timber merchant, inherited his father-in-law's thriving business. He was a Protestant, Irish Protestant businessman who became very wealthy. He was an avid art collector, and he had a thriving business. He became a Quaker, however, there was a problem because Penrose had a lavish taste and worldly interest that didn't quite fit with the strict, severe moral code of then the Quakers. He was an art patron who led a very luxurious life. He was, in fact, disowned by the Quakers because of his extravagance. So one fine day, when Penrose was traveling to Paris to buy more art, he was introduced to the famous revolutionary Jacobin painter, none other than Jacques-Louis David. Penrose's niece, Julia, was then a student of Jacques-Louis David, which made it easier for Penrose to visit David's studio, which was then at the Louvre. By the way, David did not want to paint Cooper Penrose, but he did because Julia asked him to do that favor. Here, David painted him in a very austere manner, and I think that pleased very much the Quakers, who had just earlier thrown out Cooper Penrose because of his lavish lifestyle. David's neoclassical style is very, very prominent in the Louvre today in his historical paintings. He was a revolutionary. David was a political activist. He was the supporter of the French Revolution. He was a friend of the infamous Robespierre, who led the Reign of Terror. Not a nice guy. And David was a member of the Jacobin Club, the revolutionaries. He even voted in the National Convention for the execution of Louis XVI, the king who was deposed when the French Revolution in 1789 began. His wife was a royal. Jacques-Louis David's wife was a royalist, and divorced David because of his vote to, he voted for the revolution. After the revolution and under Robespierre's leadership, David was effectively the dictator of the arts under the French Republic. He made it to the top. But when Robespierre fell from power, David was imprisoned. Robespierre was guillotined, but fortunately for us, David was not guillotined, and his wife, who divorced him, did help him out, got him released from prison. But as soon as he was released from prison, Jacques-Louis David again knew where his bread was buttered, and he allied himself with the next political regime, Napoleon Bonaparte. During this period, David became the official first court painter of the Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. And David actually had two very important pupils, Auguste Ingres, who was a fabulous painter, and Antoine Jean Gros, another fabulous French painter of the 17th century. And David, in 1803, became, because he was so famous and so productive in his art, he became a recipient of France's highest honor, the Legion of Honor. He became a Chevalier de la Légion d'honneur in 1803, 1 year after he painted the portrait of Cooper Penrose. And I just want to tell you that the greatest day in my life was in 2003, when President Jacques Chirac gave me the French Legion of Honor Award, the first American woman to get that award. So I'm very proud of that, for the fostering cooperation between France and the United States by teaching French, etc. I still have the medal encased in a glass box on my wall as a painting. But Napoleon too fell from power, and the Bourbon King Louis XVIII granted amnesty to David and offered him the position again as court painter, but David cleverly refused and self-exiled himself to Brussels, where he remained until his death. So that is Jacques-Louis David, who, by the way, learned to paint from François Boucher, the painter of the very Rococo painting that we looked at. But David eventually turned away from Rococo style, and he said, I want to become the greatest neoclassical master. And he worked in a much more severe, austere Greek and Roman classical style, but he is and still remains to be the symbol of French national pride and identity. And we have that painting. Moving on now to the Dutch painting. I'm going to skip the parable of the sower, because although it is a fabulous cosmic landscape style painting by Peter Bruegel the Elder in the Renaissance period of 1557, smack into the Renaissance period, this is one of Bruegel's earliest signed religious paintings done before he left. And you can see that it's all about the parable of the sower of the seeds. There's good land, there's bad land, there's a beautiful blue river. On the other side, you see people gathered, very small figures gathered around Jesus Christ, who is speaking, and it's a parable, and which has theological and moral lessons. I'd rather go on to the Rembrandt, which is probably the greatest work of this museum, and we're very lucky to have it. This is Rembrandt's depiction of Saint Bartholomew. Very dark, very special, light coming from the forehead, light on his hands, light from the knife. Rembrandt was born and studied painting in Leiden. He often treated biblical and historical and mythological themes in his paintings. He moved to Amsterdam, Holland in 1631 to 1632, where again, we are snap dab in the middle of the 17th century, where Louis XIV was alive in France and conquering the world, and where there was a great movement of art and music and literature. Molière, Lucide, Corneille, Racine, etc. in France, the great period. And here we are in art in the great period in Holland. Rembrandt moved to Amsterdam, as I said, in 1631. He painted many small bust-length and large full-length portraits. He married Saskia van Uylenburg, who was the daughter of an important politician, but more importantly, the cousin of an art dealer. Rembrandt had 3 sons, but tragically, they died before he died. With his wife's rich dowry and Rembrandt's artistic success, he lived very well in Amsterdam from 1635 to 1640, but he became bankrupt in 1656. After his wife died in 1642, he literally fell apart. He produced hundreds of paintings, etchings, and drawings, and he was an effective teacher. He had a very sad life, and this sadness is very clearly depicted and reflected in his use of dark colors and minimal light in this famous Saint Bartholomew masterpiece. Now, Saint Bartholomew is a rather large and very dramatic portrait of a martyr who endured many trials, many tribulations, like Rembrandt himself. He suffered at the death of his wife and 3 sons. Saint Bartholomew here carries a butcher's knife in his right hand, and the knife is an attribute. He was one of 12 apostles. He was skinned alive in Armenia. Rembrandt painted this independent picture of apostles throughout his career, and he approached biblical figures as individuals rather than as types. This apostle appears to be determined, resolute, preoccupied perhaps by spiritual concerns. His eyes are animated, his brow is furrowed, his mouth is slightly open as if he's contemplating a deep question of ethical concern. His pose, it's somewhat unsettled by these concerns. In the midst of this overwhelming darkness, the black background, the brown robes, the black beard, the black hair, the mustache is black, only the white white color at his wrist, the white hands, the white forehead are revealed. This light in this painting comes from his forehead on his face and the hand carrying the knife. This is a portrait of a holy figure who is portrayed as a real person who has suffered. Rembrandt did not idealize him as a saint, but instead he made this apostle seem lifelike and complex. I must tell you, for the book, every time I pass this painting and I look at it, I see Robert De Niro's face. Am I crazed, or is this a likeness very similar to Robert De Niro? Anyway, now we're moving on to the last but not least great American paintings. We have Eastman Johnson's The Cranberry Harvest, the island of Nantucket. Eastman Johnson has been praised as the most American of American painters. He moved in 1849 to Dusseldorf, and he enrolled in the Royal Academy. He wanted a classical education. He went to Europe for a classical education in art, and he worked a little later in the studio of the American artist named Emanuel Leutze. He went to Holland after Germany in late 1851, and he achieved great skills studying there. He was offered the position of the court painter in The Hague, but he declined this honor. He moved to Paris, so Germany, Holland, now Paris, to study art in 1855, and he studied with Thomas Couture. He returned to the United States later that year on the death of his mother. He was very much foreign trained, but he wanted to find an American subject to paint that would allow him to reveal his European technical skills. He began to paint genre scenes in 1870s from the island of Nantucket, Massachusetts, where he and his family spent their summers. And the Cranberry Harvest, the island of Nantucket, is the culmination of Johnson's Nantucket work, celebrating New England outdoor life. Now let's look at this painting, and we see a bog on the north shore of Nantucket Island along the region known as the Cliff. The bog is painted as brown with dried grasses and some wild flowers and red berries. People in this painting are mostly women, children, and old men picking berries. They're then loaded onto a wagon, which you can see off to the right. In the distance, we see the Nantucket spires. We see a lighthouse, and we see some shipping. The The figures in the foreground are very real, and our woman with a hat looking perhaps at an approaching boy carrying an infant, maybe her own child, is in this painting. He even painted a windmill on the horizon left of center to give us a better idea of the Nantucket landscape. This is a late afternoon scene with the pink glow at the horizon. The pickers wear bright colored clothing. They all exchange glances and gestures. The emotion of the people in this painting is very restrained. Copley has an evocative rather than a descriptive technique. This technique gives an air of spontaneous truth to the painting. It is as if he's painting what he sees. He's not trying to make a political statement about the horrors and the plight of the cranberry pickers. Johnson, the great American painter, is painting, had painted 17 paintings of this scene of the cranberry harvest. And we have one of them. Now, the last but not least, I'm going to talk about a painting that I love, which is the portrait of Mrs. Thomas Gage, a very important painting by John Singleton Copley, the greatest American artist of the 18th century. This portrait was, the date of this portrait is very important. This portrait was painted in 1771, just 5 years before, guess what? The American Revolution. And John Singleton Copley, who is called the greatest American artist of the 18th century, grew up in Boston. His stepfather taught him about engraving, composition, technique, and entrepreneurship. Benjamin West and Sir Joshua Reynolds wanted him to study abroad, as Eastman Johnson did, but no, he refused. But later, in 1774, the date again being very important, he spent a year in Italy, getting away from what was soon to be the American Revolution, and moved on the continent before settling permanently in London. He had success with history paintings and portraits during the 1790s and continued to paint until his death in 1850. Now let's look at this painting rapidly. Mrs. Gage was referred to as the Duchess by her husband and by his fellow officers. Her husband was, importantly, the commander-in-chief of British forces in North America around 1771. Mrs. Gage was well known throughout New York. She's wearing a décolleté dress, white skin, very noble, a Turkish turban. Her family was somehow related to Turkey. Her father was born in Turkey. She wears a delicate necklace, the famous, wonderful 2 strings of white pearls. She's even got white pearls on her elbow, and the hairstyle, very simple below the exotic turban that she wears. She's an officer's wife and a prominent woman, with having a glimpse of a smile, with her hand leaning on the elegant blue neoclassical satin chair that has buttons. She is thinking about something. She is obviously very beautiful and rather formal in her dress, this voluptuous red or pink satin. The portrait remained in England until mid-1980s, and the Gages left America in 1775, just before the American Revolution, where, as I pointed out, her husband was the commander-in-chief of the British forces in North America. Mrs. Gage lived in London to the age of 90 and never remarried after her husband's death. She had 11 children. Now that's an amazing thing. A woman with 11 children staying alive in London until the age of 90. And that's the end of my tour of the gallery, and invite you all to join us in seeing this wonderful and very special collection of pearls of art through the ages. Thank you very much. Now, if there are any questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Susan. Well done. Excellent tour. Yes, we are going to take questions now. I didn't see any in the chat, but if anyone has a question now, you're welcome to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. And if not, I can kick us off. You know, Susan, it was amazing hearing your story about receiving that medal from the French?
Oh, I can actually bring it to you and show it to you. It's quite
Oh
an
my gosh,
amazing
wow.
thing. And the other thing it gives you, by the way, of course, the way the French wear it is a little red ribbon here. You don't wear the whole medal because it's very ostentatious if you do that. You put the medal away on your wall. And so that's exactly what I've done. But if you wear the little red ribbon in America, it doesn't get you anywhere. If you wear the little red ribbon on your lapel in France, this is an important thing. You get the
Everyone
best seat
knows.
in the restaurant. You get in where everyone is waiting and you are at the end of the line and you're called in first. And everyone looks at you like, oh my God, who is this person? So it's a big deal in France, but
Wow.
not too
Well,
well known in the United
congratulations.
States. Yeah.
And yeah, I was curious, you know, because you have your PhD in French literature and you've studied it so much, I was curious if you saw any parallels between French literature and the pieces that we have in the art movements. Like, were they kind of mirroring each other, or was it were they more separate from one another?
No, I think, as I said, there's a huge number of parallels. The neoclassical style was very much classical style in French, for example, in the 17th century of two major guys, okay? One is Corneille, who is very austere, very strict, lucide, the warrior, but nothing moves much. It's very, very balanced, harmonious, and moderation and restraint, and nobody uses bad words. It's very, very, very formalized. That's classical. Then there's this other side of France, French literature of the 17th century called Baroque, where you have this fabulous writer called Racine, who wrote Phèdre. He was classical. Phèdre is a Greek myth, but he did it with a lot of emotion, a lot of passion, a lot of movement, and a lot of tension. It's fabulous stuff, absolutely fabulous stuff, and very easy to put on stage because there's so much movement. And of course, the Rococo style in French art is depicted more or less in some Rococo works. The Renaissance style and in literature with the 16th century poets like Ronsard and Du Bellay, and they very similar. There's a lot of similarities between French art and French literature and French music too, because I am a musician, you know. I've studied, I actually concertized this year because we were at home in this confinement and I didn't know what else to do with my life, so I gave concerts. But the French music is also very important.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And because, yeah, I mean, I know only more about the art side of things. And so it's interesting to see how there was overlap between these different types of media. And I mean, I studied architecture a lot. And so I know, you know, the neoclassical architecture is a huge movement as well. So interesting just to see how all of these different media overlapped.
Well,
are there any other questions? Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
From the point of view of architecture, it's very interesting that the Louvre, which is a French magnificent architecture, is in the classical style. You know, 3 levels, everything is balanced, 1, 2, 3, and the French love the style of the Louvre. It's very classical, very austere, very balanced. It's almost mathematical when you look at and then this. I don't remember the president who came along. Maybe it was Hollande. He came along and he put this pyramid up, this glass thing. Do you understand what this did? I would take taxis in France and the French taxi drivers would say, how could he do this to our wonderful Louvre? They would go absolutely crazy. How could you stick this pyramid, which is so weird, it's so modern, it's so completely un-French? But you know what happened? After about 10 years of this screaming and yelling about the two different styles, the classical and the very modern, they love it. They love it now. They absolutely love it. So it takes time to get used to it, but the French architectural classical style is very typical of the French literary, lucide, you know, Corneille's classical style. And, you know, music, same thing. You talk about what is classical music. You know, you have the classical style of Bach, very classical Baroque style also in music is reflective. So these words have some meaning, but there's overlap always.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, yeah, I think it's so synonymous with French culture when you think of like neoclassical. I mean, obviously it was in a lot of other countries, but you kind of think of it as like the Louvre and these you know, palaces in France, definitely. Exactly. And so now that pyramid is also synonymous with Paris, right? It
sure is.
Louvre, so yeah. Are there any other questions from our audience? Anyone wants to unmute themselves, they can go ahead and ask now. No? Okay, well, thank you so much. I do want to make an announcement before we go, which is that we have an upcoming event at the Timken. So following the success of our ornament making workshops, we have another craft workshop that we're happy to bring you. This one is Valentine's Day themed, so it'll be on Thursday, February 11th at 4 p.m. Pacific time. And you'll be making what you see before you, that beautiful sculptural Valentine's Day card. Our teaching artist will be Bhavna Mehta, who is our 2018 summer artist in residence. So she has had a relationship with the Timken in the past, and so we're so happy to have her back teaching this class about the art of paper manipulation. We really hope that you join us when if you look on our website, or you can go on, if you're on Facebook already, it'll be really easy. Just go to the events tab on our page and you'll see it there. You can register either through the website or through the link on Facebook, which will take you to the website. And when you register, you will receive a supplies kit with everything that you need to make this, and that'll be mailed to your home. So this is completely COVID friendly, where the workshop will be on Zoom, and then all of the supplies will be mailed to you. So a great event to do while you're, stuck at home. And we really hope that you join us to kind of get in the Valentine's Day spirit. You can do it as a couples activity, or with some, with whoever's there with you at home. So we really hope you join us. And like I said, you can learn more on our website. So as for other events, like always, we'll see you next week at the same time, 11 a.m. on Thursday, for another tour of our museum. So thank you again, Susan. Great job on your first tour. Thank you.
If anyone wants to see the virtual tour or hear it, how do they get to it?
So it'll be the same link. Yeah, so the same way that you got to this one on our website, you can go there again. It's also on Facebook Live. So if you go to our Facebook page at 11 a.m., it'll pop up right at you. You can't miss it.
So if I go to the same link that I linked on to give the tour, it'll be there.
Exactly.
How
Yeah, it's
long
always
does
on that
it
events
stay on?
page. If you go to the timkenmuseum.org and then our events tab or calendar tab, I think it says events. You'll have all the events that are coming up, and that'll include our tours, our workshops. Yeah.
Okay, super. Thank you so much, Allison, for your help.
So we'll see you in the audience next time. But
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.